This Agroecology TRANSECT event. And again, Jeroen is our expert introducing the project and being the face of TRANSECT today. Jeroen, the floor is yours. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Of course. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. Good morning. I'm very happy that you could join in this webinar. The title is Monitoring the Performance of Agroecology Insights from the Stream T tool. And I will be giving a short introduction into the project in which this is embedded, this effort, and a little bit already the concepts and ideas that are behind it to prepare for the other parts of the webinar. The project is the Agroecology TRANSECT project, and that project that aims to develop evidence, so based on scientific analysis on effects and hopefully positive effects of agroecology in terms of climate change mitigation, biodiversity, and farm resilience. But even from a broader perspective, these three themes are sort of quite central within the project. But the analysis goes further than that, and we'll get back to that in a few seconds. The interaction of the project is very strong with stakeholders in the field. So with farmers and their organizations, advisors, NGOs, decision makers. And the idea is to provide knowledge and insight into what the impacts are of farming with nature, building on ecological principles and agroecology in general. And to allow that, to allow both the analysis but also the outreach, there's a very strong interaction with 11 case studies, which are being called innovation hubs within the project. And they are really the real life examples of where we work and what we analyze and where we try to also promote agroecology. And you see them already here on the map on the right-hand side. And here I would like to stress that these innovation hubs are quite diverse, very different from each other. So there are 11 in total, but we have categorized them into 4 or 5 different categories. And so there are some grassland-based systems that have herbivores grazing there. There are annual cropping systems that focus, for instance, on cover cropping or reduced tillage. There are integrated crop livestock systems that have cropping, feed production, and livestock integrated on the same farm. So quite diversified. Then there is also an initiative that is a knowledge hub for farmers, and also a organization that organizes vegetable boxes that are being distributed in a peri-urban area. And there is also attention for more the perennials in terms of vineyards and orchards and the use of cover crops within these systems. Well, you can imagine this huge diversity is, on one hand, great. It's very nice to work with that diversity in a project. But if we want to analyze it, it also creates a challenge. Because how do you compare these different kinds of systems with each other? And even within each category, there is still a lot of diversity. So that's a challenge. And actually, that's a challenge that we are trying to address here in this work that will be presented this morning. On top of that, there's the agroecology as a science, movement, and practice. And well, there's been a lot of development over the last decades, I think I can say, in terms of, what is agroecology precisely? So to come up with a definition and conceptual approach, and also to show the principles that are underlying agroecology. And well, those principles are, of course, important. You can see them on the right-hand side, and they are in more or less 2 different sort of categories again. So on the bottom part with the green fonts of the letters or of the numbers, there is more the biophysical and ecological system, you could say. And in the top, in the golden font, it is the more socio-institutional aspects and value aspects, the broader values beyond only the economic values that are important. And so if we work with these innovation hubs and also with agroecology in general, we want to evaluate whether they meet these criteria, these principles. And from the principles, you can also derive all kind of different criteria and indicators how to evaluate the performance of different case studies or farms or initiatives that follow agroecology. And then we want to see, well, how far are they in a transition and in implementation of good practices, and what is the potential impact that we can expect? That is something, that's the question where the streamed framework and tool will focus on. Another aspect of the project is that there is a strong participatory approach, strong interaction with we have scientists on the one hand that work in work packages that have different focus areas, and then with the people innovation hubs and broader, also working with all kind of other initiatives within Europe and beyond that focus on agroecology. Within the project, there are different activities and approaches that foster that participatory approach. And those are listed or shown in the top left. You can see that we go through learning cycles, and also that cyclic nature of learning is also shown in the figure in the bottom. So we make action plans, we reflect on the history of the previous year, basically, what have we learned, and all of that is embedded in a theory of change that gives also a little bit of a roadmap of where we want to go. The interactions are also shown throughout the life cycle of the project. Well, there are a lot of interactions that are indicated by the circular symbols that you see there, and it's not only these symbols basically that highlight the interaction, but there's much more, of course, also bilateral and frequent interaction with people in the innovation hubs. And also that is basically the context in which this framework was developed. So what the webinar will be about is the stream. So that's the supporting agricultural transitions through evaluation and monitoring. And that is a combination of, on the one hand, a framework, and that framework is really the process in which through co-development and co-creation with the stakeholders, a tool is being developed, and that's the Stream T, that basically is used to analyze the performance of innovation hubs and other initiatives within the project. And of course, it's also meant as a way to evaluate many other projects. It's an outcome of the project that we hope will be used much more broadly than that. And well, it has been developed in 3 phases. So a quite intensive co-development phase, where in interaction with the innovation hubs and other project partners, these criteria, indicators, etc., have been developed. And then the actual use of the tool in the multi-criteria evaluation phase, where data is being collected in many different farms, so along that tool. And then, of course, it's also important to reflect on, well, how useful was the framework and also the tool to make these assessments. So those are the 3 main phases, you could say, in the development of this approach. So in this webinar, first there will be some questions and explanation of the Mentimeter approach. Then Cecilia Sacria will present the tool that has been developed and applied. Then there will be an interview, and that is done by Adrien Zwartebroeks and Julie Klustli. And after that, Maria-Helene de la Hove will present preliminary results of the transversal analysis. So she will explain what that entails with the tool. And we will finish with questions and answering of any queries that you may have. So I give the floor back to Anna for the next part. So go ahead.
Once again, muted. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Jeroen. That was really, really good. And I think you gave a great sort of like overview of what TRANSECT has been. We will be posting some of the relevant links so that anybody can find it, because I've seen in the chat that some people are more interested in the practice, some people more interested in the policy. So we'll make sure to post the relevant information so that you can see it. But first, we want to learn a little bit about you, because it's often the case that we just share information rather than ask a little bit of information from you. And so to do that, we have prepared a short Mentimeter where we expect you to help us a little bit understand where you're coming from and what are your interests in joining this event. So if you could either click on the link that we've put in the chat, or if you can just use that scan code to let us know if you're involved in agroecological performance monitoring already. Yes, no, quite an easy question to get you started. So if you could let us know. This is really interesting for us because, of course, we've seen that there's a lot of there happening, but again, it's that cohesion piece that we're looking for and that we would like to understand a little bit better. See that most people have answered a very, very dramatic lean towards the yes. So this should be very interesting because you can actually confront it with what you're doing at the moment. Just going to be a little bit faster just to make sure that we get through the 4 initial questions that we have. And the question is around what tools are you using? I see that some people have already started responding. So thank you very much, because it makes my life so much easier, because I can highlight that, for example, people have been using tape, Oasis. There's some people using the Global Forest Watch, exploring AI options. So a little bit of everything, but tape seems to be coming quite strong. Oasis as well. There's also multi-criteria analysis. There's the Scottish Government whole plan from the Farm Carbon Toolkit, which I'll share with my colleagues in Europe. There are 2 very interesting models that we've developed here in the UK. And then also surveys, which of course are always very interesting. A little bit about finance. Again, we've set this process so that you guys can answer at your leisure as well. So if through the event you want to come back, answer a little bit more, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to keep you there, but also move to the next one and ask you, which of the challenges are you facing when you're monitoring? We've seen that part of developing these tools is that, of course, nothing is absolutely perfect, and you will be facing areas where things are stronger, harder, depending on your context. So we wanted to know a little bit what are the main challenges, and it feels like both the lack of resources, time or money or workers, and difficulties when comparing the different countries are quite strong. Also, the difficulty identifying easy to measure indicators, because this is holistic, that's a big one to consider. Difficulty selecting the relevant measure indicators, again, that pieces with that sort of like unique context analysis. But it seems like we're all facing a fair amount of difficulties here, which we hope we'll be able to address through today's presentation. So keep them coming. This is brilliant. Also, just for you to know, this information will be shared with you later on. So the more you help, the more you will have information from all over the world to answer your questions. And finally, before we start, we want to know what you're hoping to learn from this webinar. It's always really important for us because it helps us not only make sure that we're answering your questions now, but actually thinking to the future, what kind of resources we could create, we could fine tune for this. There's something about learning about Stream T, which is really nice because this resource will be developed before the end of the process. A little bit around ideas for teaching, which I always love to hear because that's exactly what we want. Something around how to measure the immeasurable. That's an easy one. No pressure, team. That's going to be an easy one to answer. of course, a little bit about the difference between the stream tools and other tools. Experiences, that's really important, and it connects with that piece that Jeroen was talking about understanding what people are doing rather than just keeping it on the theoretical. And of course, tools that can help ourselves. So that seems like a really interesting way to start, everyone. Again, as I mentioned, I will keep this up, so feel free to continue to answer. If you can think of anything else, bring it back. But I think I've talked enough and fast enough, so it's time to actually hear from the experts. So I'm going to shut up now and leave the floor to the amazing Marie-Hélène, who's going to be presenting now. The floor is yours. And I'm going to stop sharing if I can for the life of me. Here we go. The floor is yours now.
Yeah, I think it's actually me first. We have Maëlan at the end, but
yeah, sorry.
It's all right. Thanks very much, Anna, and everyone for sharing your thoughts and your expectations on the webinar and also some of the challenges. I hope that we'll be able to share some interesting reflections from our side. And yeah, so I wanted to follow on from Jeroen's introductory talk to share a little bit about our experiences in the project with monitoring the performance of agroecology by introducing you to this tool that we developed that we called the StreamT tool. But first of all, I wanted to start with this figure that I like that was taken from the FarmPep website, which I think nicely illustrates some of the realities in the context where agroecological monitoring often takes place. So increasingly, agroecological monitoring is addressing real farming systems. It's also increasingly aiming to be farmer-centric, so to really answer to farmer needs and value local knowledge. And at the same time, it's a process that also makes use of the resources and skills of specialists, and therefore also often tries to provide some generalizable insights. And so this is very much also what we went about doing in our project as well. We wanted to monitor the performance of agroecological farming systems to be able to provide knowledge which was actionable to each individual innovation hub in our project. And at the same time, by pooling together results across this diversity of hubs and farming systems in our project, we wanted to be able to provide some generalizable insights on how agroecology performs in a European context. And as some of you can see, or also as Jeroen kind of hinted at earlier, there's a bit of a tension between these two aims, between trying to provide knowledge which is very contextualized with this aim of generalizability, which also requires comparisons and therefore standardization. And so this was also the question that we were faced with at the start of this process some years ago. So how can we pursue a performance monitoring process that can advance both types of knowledge? And so this investigation culminated in what we've called STREAM, so supporting agroecological transitions through co-designed evaluation and monitoring. And as we've mentioned, this is composed in part of a co-design framework, explaining how we as researchers in the project, together with facilitator teams from each of the 11 innovation hubs, were able to co-design a tool and then the tool itself. We thought it was important to put equal emphasis on both the process and the final product, let's say, because often there's not much that's said about how these tools are designed. And we think that this, shedding light on this process can also help other researchers or other practitioners engaged in this process with this complex process of also selecting and defining indicators. And what's maybe important to mention is, well, our project is ending soon, but this continues to be a dialogue, and the tool is also undergoing continuous refinement, especially now as we're entering this phase of analysis and interpretation of the results. So as we mentioned already, our project consists of these 11 innovation hubs in Europe that are all very diverse. But the reason why I wanted to bring the emphasis back to the project, it's also because it implemented quite this particular and unique project governance approach, which we think created the necessary conditions to be able to engage in a successful co-design process. So it was important. And some of the key elements for this was that the project involved these annual, or in some cases also biannual, in-person co-innovation workshops, where we all met together to advance these different research lines. So one research line was, of course, the development of this monitoring tool. But what's important to mention is that we also had some complementary research lines. For example, a research line which looked at portraying the socio-technical systems of each innovation hub. And this allowed us to kind of have a shared understanding of how each innovation hub operates. And then a last element, which was really fundamental, was that the project involved these structured moments of reflection on whether the project was proceeding in the right direction. And this was generally important because it created this climate of openness and of trust, which was fundamental to a process which requires so much iteration and refinement. So to now talk a little bit about the co-design process and this co-design framework. So we identified these 5 different elements that needed to be co-defined together between researchers and Innovation Hub facilitators. And so the first 3 related to together trying to characterize the work that's taking place with regards to monitoring agroecology in each Innovation Hub, in terms of the expectations behind monitoring, in terms of the objects of analysis, of course, and more broadly in terms of their monitoring context. And then we needed to co-define the elements of the tool itself, which we divided between core evaluation criteria and then core and optional indicators. And the framework explains 3 different sets of activities that were used to sequentially co-define each of these elements. So to say a little bit more about what we mean by this characterization of the innovation hubs and why this was meaningful to the process. First of all, I just wanted to highlight that this was really informed in large part by these 2 papers, the first by Moggen and Anderson and the second by Salembier, which among other things provide a very rich and useful kind of compasses to define different monitoring contexts where agroecology is being evaluated. And so this really helped us kind of inform what elements of the different innovation hubs can be important to capture while going into the process of defining a tool. And so, the first related to clarifying the expectations behind performance evaluation. And what we found was that some innovation hubs were interested in developing a tool which could help them refine specific agroecological practices from also a technical perspective, while other innovation hubs were working with agroecological practices that were more mature and were looking to obtain additional data to support the scaling of these practices. We characterized the different objects of analysis, maybe quite obviously in terms of the production systems that we were interested in monitoring and also the specific agroecological practices. And then when it came to the monitoring context, we identified different dimensions, which were really important to clarify. First was the degree of monitoring experience and readiness in each of the innovation hubs. It was particularly important to clarify whether the innovation hubs were already working with a predefined set of farmers or whether they were looking to conduct monitoring on new farms. We, of course, needed to clarify a bit the scale of monitoring. Some innovation hubs are working on experimental plots within farms. Others were working more at a field or farm level. And also the preferred evaluation approach. So some innovation hubs are really already doing longitudinal monitoring, and so are also interested in this temporal dimension, whereas others were more interested in conducting an observational study, for example, following a space for time approach. And lastly, we also wanted to understand to what extent innovation hubs are wanting to involve farmers in the monitoring itself, or to what extent this would be conducted by enumerators or other experts. And so what we found was that there were different kind of combinations of these elements, which led us to construct a sort of typology of innovation hub. So we found some innovation hubs that we referred to as embedded. So these were really conducting longitudinal studies, often on experimental plots, with an established network of farmers. Other innovation hubs fell into a more expansive dimension, so they were really looking to expand monitoring to new farms to support scaling. And the last cluster was called emergent, and these were innovation hubs that had only recently started engaging in monitoring activities on farms or were starting this with this project. So then we used this kind of diversity of features as a sort of compass to the definition of the evaluation criteria and indicators. And we had 3 kind of sets of activities. The first involved a mapping of the farming systems in each innovation hub in terms of the agroecological practices that they were interested in monitoring and experimenting with, and also what the aims of these practices were. The second set of activities focused more on trying to prioritize some of these practices and ambitions. And this was from the perspective of which ones were seen as most important in the innovation hubs, the most salient, but also more feasible to measure. And then the last set of activities, so this all took place over 2 years, was more oriented towards kind of validating what emerged from the previous steps and also making refinements, for example, in terms of the monitoring protocols. And so, yeah, how do we go about defining these criteria? So we defined these as what should agroecology deliver on. And so these were really focused on clustering the themes that came out of what were the objectives of the different practices and elements of the farming systems that the innovation hubs are interested in monitoring. And we also wanted to make sure that these different criteria could in some way also touch upon each of the 13 principles of agroecology, but also these 3 pillars that we had in the project, that we were interested in exploring the contributions of agroecology to climate, to biodiversity, and to socioeconomic resilience. The indicators were then basically a means to measure contributions towards these criteria. And we differentiated between core indicators that we wanted to measure across all of the innovation hubs, as well as optional indicators which reflected maybe more unique features in just one innovation hub or in a cluster of innovation hubs. And some of the elements that guided our thinking in the definition of these indicators was, this notion of, trying to represent both these defining practices as well as their ambitions. So to have both practice-based indicators and outcome-based indicators, but also to balance this salience with feasibility. So what emerged from our conversations was the need to collect these indicators, ideally through a closed survey, which could take place under 2 hours, and through field measurements that could also be accessible to these more emergent innovation hubs that were just starting a monitoring process. What also came out of these conversations was a preference for relying on reproducible indicators. So for example, to rely on results from soil laboratory analysis over more qualitative evaluations of soil health. Also to have indicators that address both the farm scale and the field or plot scale, as both were identified as relevant. And we also found it difficult to fully standardize some field measurement protocols. And so we found it important that each innovation hub could also have a local comparator data so that we could compare essentially effect sizes across innovation hubs. So now to move on to what came out of this process, so the tool itself. The tool consists of 9 evaluation criteria. We have 2 criteria looking at biodiversity, both planned and associated, 2 criteria that are more in the climate domain, looking at both adaptation and mitigation, 1 criteria looking at animal health and welfare, and the remainder that are more in the socioeconomic domain, looking at economic viability, job satisfaction and job creation, participation in agroecological networks, and agroecological knowledge, And we identified 50 core indicators that were monitored across all 11 innovation hubs that span these 9 criteria. And we then wanted to do a very quick and also rough comparison of what came out of these core indicators in comparison to some of the existing tools that are monitoring agroecology. And what we saw is that with STREAM, what we're trying to do is try to span some dimensions and some criteria that are not covered often by existing tools. This includes, for example, climate mitigation is often under-addressed, so is animal health and welfare, and so is participation in networks and agroecological knowledge. And what we also see is that, however, we try to do this through a more limited set of indicators than some of these other tools like OASIS, which try to be try to really reflect this holistic ambition of agroecology and so are very comprehensive. So it's maybe a bit difficult to kind of go through each of the core indicators. So I just wanted to maybe put the spotlight on a few of them. So in the planned agrobiodiversity criteria, we wanted to go beyond just looking at crop and livestock diversity, but also put an emphasis on land use diversity and on the complexity of rotations. When it came to associated agrobiodiversity, there was a shared interest by the innovation hubs to focus on maybe functional aspects of biodiversity. And there was a shared interest in soil health, so we focused on monitoring soil biodiversity alongside a diversity of semi-natural habitats on farm, but also on management intensity proxies. For animal health, we wanted to look at what was the perceived severity of disease, but also reliance on synthetic veterinary treatments. For the climate domains, we wanted to do both some analysis of soil parameters, but also look at the presence of practices on farms that can both contribute towards increased soil carbon and also climate resilience. We looked also at the severity of weeds and disease, but also of proxies related to high energy consumption and emission from inputs. In the economy domain, we had, I think, the greatest numbers of indicators. We wanted to look at both the extent to which farms were integrated in local markets and were, for example, having direct sale channels. We also wanted to look at how farms are valorizing their products, for example, through transformation or through certification schemes. But importantly, also the input autonomy. So to what extent are these farms trying to rely on their own internal inputs over more commercial inputs, as well as maybe more predictable indicators looking at revenues, yields, but also a future outlook of the farm. Then we had quite some common indicators looking at job satisfaction, both with income, but also with the arduousness of labor. We also tried to have some indicators looking at a gendered division of labor and working time across different agroecological farms. And in the participation criteria, we wanted to look at engagement in the diversity of network, but we were also interested in scoping to what extent this participation was active. So to try and tap into this idea of greater farmer agency, perhaps, on agroecological farms. And lastly, in the agroecological knowledge criteria, we wanted to look at engagement in co-creation networks and experimental networks, as well as the extent to which these farms really identified with agroecology. So what was interesting is, as we mentioned, we had this core set of indicators, but we also wanted to allow the opportunity for each innovation hub to explore additional indicators, what we called optional indicators. And what we found was that there were actually quite a lot of these. So this also kind of hints at a little bit at the limits of standardization. So for example, in Guadeloupe, which had the greatest number of optional indicators, these were, above 40. So we can see that the core indicators covered just over half of, let's say, their monitoring needs. And these optional indicators were most prevalent in the climate and adaptation and environmental resilience criteria and in the associated agrobiodiversity criteria. And we tried to look into whether there were some patterns there, which could maybe also cluster different types of innovation hubs and identify commonalities between different sets of systems. And so we looked, for example, at patterns across production systems. And what we found was that in arable systems, there was a more emphasis on monitoring climate resilience. There was also an emphasis on monitoring weed density and diversity, and also on having more specific indicators looking at the complexity of rotations, for example, focusing on the presence of leys in rotations and legumes. In permanent grasslands, we also found a unique set of indicators. These, for example, looked at flowering density in meadows, but also the presence of landscape features and the presence of specific indicator plant species. The presence of livestock was, of course, also a determining factor in these optional indicators, particularly looking at animal welfare indicators, but also in the climate mitigation criteria, looking at livestock-related emissions. And we also found some unique indicators related to more market gardening-oriented innovation hubs, and these related to the presence of storage infrastructure on farms, but also on contributions to nutrition. We were also interested in seeing whether there were different types of innovation hubs that also showed commonalities in terms of optional indicators. And here what we found was that innovation hubs belonging to this more embedded type were more specialized. So they monitored a greater number of optional indicators, but across fewer criteria. So these were the innovation hubs that had these more longitudinal monitoring approaches with an established set of farms. What we also found was that they monitored more diverse taxa and also put more emphasis on resilience. Beyond that, maybe there were also some obvious results. So we found that the more expansive oriented innovation hubs, of course, monitored a greater number of optional indicators than the more emergent types of innovation hubs that were just starting this monitoring process. I wanted to, before passing the word to some of our innovation hub facilitators who can share some experiences and some results that are emerging, I wanted to also conclude with a bit of a SWOT analysis that we did. So as I mentioned in the project, we also have a lot of emphasis on reflexivity. And so we tried to, here I'm just going to focus on some of the strengths and weaknesses that we identified with the tool that relate both to this dimension of producing locally actionable knowledge and more generic knowledge. And so some of the strengths that we identified was that, innovation hub facilitators appreciated that the tool was quite flexible, both in terms of the design of some of the protocols, but also in terms of the optional indicators. And that they also found that this co-design process was able to successfully result in indicators that were perceived as legitimate and credible. We also reflected a little bit on how these results could contribute to advancing local actionable knowledge in each of the innovation hubs. And we kind of articulated this in terms of being able to support local action planning. So in terms of being able to identify different entry points for different interventions, but also in helping to develop, let's say, motivating narratives through positive results or positive synergies across indicators. What innovation hubs also said is that some of these results could help support the perceived legitimacy of the different innovation hubs. This was particularly within these more emergent innovation hubs in the eyes of both farmers and policy, and so that this could help support advocacy and scaling for agroecology. We also found some weaknesses with the tool, however, and I think a core one related to the fact that even though we tried to bear feasibility in mind and tried to have a restricted number of core indicators, these were still quite high. And so this was still perceived as a costly process, which may have limited the potential in some innovation hubs to scope additional optional indicators or to undertaking monitoring on a greater number of farms. And this high number of indicators also complicates things in terms of how we can really mobilize and use these results. So it's kind of quite difficult to really act upon such a high diversity of findings, let's say. What we also found was that there were a few blind spots in our tool, particularly if we compare it to some existing tools. One criteria was this job satisfaction domain. And what we also found was that, of course, this tool was co-designed between researchers and innovation hub facilitators, but there was still a bit of a distance to farmers themselves. And so we can question to what extent this tool is really legitimate from this perspective. And so I would like to end here and now pass the word to my colleagues Adrien and Julie, who will share some of the experiences from the field in implementing the tool in their innovation hubs. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Yes, as you mentioned, we'll try now to look and to have the experience of a researcher that used the tool on his own, in his own context, in her own context, sorry. And so we'll talk with Julie Klutzli. Hello, Julie.
Hello. Hello, Adrien.
So, thank you. So we are with Julie, which is a researcher at RKFF, so in Switzerland. And she's also a facilitator of the Swiss Innovation Hubs. So one of the case study of the project that use the tool, I would say more on field and in their own context. And maybe to start it, could you maybe recap what you did during this monitoring process and how was it perceived by farmers or by the researcher?
Yes. So as Cecilia said, we started from the common monitoring protocol developed with Cecilia and the other innovation hubs, but also we quickly saw an opportunity to go further and address an additional research question that really matters to us. So these optional indicators. Our focus from the Swiss Grassland Society was for this project on temporary grassland in the crop rotation, which is a key agroecological practice in our hub. We wanted to test whether, along a gradient of this practice, we observed trade-off between agroecological principles, especially over the mid to long term with a strong focus on soil health and weed management. So we build on the consortium field protocol and survey, but extend the set of variables, particularly for soil. We also collaborated closely with soil health experts from Agroecological in Switzerland to refine the measurement and protocols. And for us, a key challenge was that all our farmers in the innovation hub already use temporary grassland in the crop rotation, so we lacked a control. And to address this, we identify a region in Switzerland when temporary grassland have not been used for sometimes for decades. We worked with local advisors and quickly set up comparable plots. And in terms of perception, farmers were highly engaged as the topic is directly relevant to their practices. And for me, this highlights the added value of doing research with farmers, We also benefited from hiring an intern from the region, which is a daughter of a farmer, and from the strong reputation of our association. That helped us to build trust very quickly. And from the perspective of the research team, this was a great example of how monitoring can evolve into a more hypothesis-driven approach while remaining grounded in a real farming system. We also saw strong interest from advisors and collaborating researchers, which created value synergies throughout the monitoring process.
Okay, thank you. And we know that this type of process, of monitoring process, can be very time consuming, depending on which process you use. And yeah, for both of for the farmers as you facilitators. So maybe what did you get out as a facilitator from this tool?
Yeah, this process was definitely time consuming, especially at the beginning. This whole co-innovation process, one of the main challenges was to build common protocols and a shared farm survey within such a broad and diverse consortium. As Bertrand, the project coordinator, said, we are trying to compare the incomparable. So the co-innovation process also felt a little bit slow at the first from our perspective, but over time we learned to trust the process, and it became a valuable opportunity to better understand the diversity of context across the innovation hub. From a facilitator point of view, we also paid a lot of attention to farmer engagement. We offered compensation for the time spent on the farm survey, as well as soil analysis and feedback on the result. The advisor strongly emphasized that farmers should be fairly compensated and that the region should also benefit from the outcomes. That's why we are planning a field day to share and discuss the results locally. What we gain overall is a rich and robust monitoring framework, even if it includes quite a large number of indicators and variables. This can be demanding, but also reflect the complexity of agroecological system. And looking ahead, I hope that our experience contributes to improving and streamlining the stream framework so it remains scientifically sound while becoming more practical and user-friendly for both farmers and facilitators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm certain those experiences will be useful for the future. You monitored more than 20 farms, if I'm right. Maybe how did you manage to engage the farmers? You already talked about compensation, etc., but how did you manage to engage them? And what would you say that were maybe key ingredients for this successful monitoring campaign that you had?
Indeed, we monitored 40 farms. It was quite interesting for us. One really important part was to make sure that we are transparent about the objective, to compensate the time and to provide something in return. But beyond that, I will say that there are a few key ingredients for a successful monitoring campaign. So first, I mentioned it's trust. It's absolutely fundamental, and it's often built on the existing reputation of our organization or our partners. Without that, it's very difficult to engage farmer in something that is quite demanding. Second, I will say motivated people on the ground, having committed facilitator, advisor, or in our case, interns who are close to the farming community makes a huge difference. And third, from our experiences, taking the time in the field and on the phone to really explain the process and listen to farmers' questions. That personal interaction is key to building engagement and keeping it over time. So overall, it's really about combining trust, human connection, and clear value for farmers.
Mm-hmm. Maybe do you have already any results that you felt as interesting, that you feel as interesting for the farmers or your innovation hub as a whole? And do those preliminary results match with your expectation in terms of providing evidence in support of agroecological scaling?
Yes, we already have some preliminary results that are quite encouraging, both for farmers and for our innovation hub. What we see is that temporary grassland tend to improve soil belt density, which means better soil structure and lower risk of compaction. That's something very concrete and relevant for farmers. We also observe a shift in earthworm communities, which suggests a positive effect on soil resilience, especially in the face of extreme weather events. That's important in the current context of climatic variability. And overall, these first results indicate that temporary grassland have a strong potential to improve soil health in arable system, which is fully in line with our expectations. So, of course, this is still preliminary. The next steps for us will be to integrate further management variable in our analysis, expand the data set with these 20 additional farms, and look beyond soil to assess other ecosystem services or agroecological principle. But already now, this finding provides useful evidence supporting agroecological practices, and they could contribute to more sustainable soil management in mixed cropping system, which is, from our perspective, highly relevant for scaling agroecology.
Well, thank you, Julie, for first to be the one of the first case study to use it, but also for your feedback and for your experience. And I leave now the floor to Marie-Hélène, if I'm right, to talk more about the transversal analysis of those results.
Thank you, Adrien. I will just quickly try to share my screen because I had an issue this morning. I'm sorry about this. Okay, so maybe I will ask the help from my colleague, Adrien. If you could share your screen, please. Thank
It
you.
always happens with this kind of things, but
yes, always. Thank you. So yes, we can see it, Adrien. Maybe when I say click, if you could just click, that would be
perfect.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you to be here. So I will finish with the last presentation of today's webinar by focusing on the transversal analysis that we plan to do based on the implementation of the StreamT tool we are talking about today. Click, please. So first of all, I wanted to give you a quick picture of the data that we have collected so far. So we have more than 100 farms that have been involved in the process so far in 10 innovation hubs out of the 11 for now. And you can see on this graph that we mostly have farms from Switzerland and also from Guadeloupe, with approximately 30 farms in where, while we have less farms in other innovation hubs sometimes. Next slide, please. When we take a look at the production systems that are covered, we can see that we have a diversity. So this is great. We mostly have mixed farming systems with crop livestock integration, and also grazing systems with grazing livestock, which are basically permanent grasslands-based system. So this is, of course, a work that is still in progress. So we are still collecting, receiving, processing, and analyzing data. We still have to validate some of the data sets that we have, but the transversal analysis will be enriched with additional data in the coming weeks, so I'm quite optimistic about that. Maybe it's also good to be more specific when we talk about transversal analysis. What do we mean? Well, as Cecilia said earlier, we had two goals with the tool, and the transversal analysis is more about the second goal of producing knowledge, which is more general about the potential of agroecology and agroecological approaches. So the basic idea is really to gather the results, the data from all the innovation hubs that we have collected so far, to evaluate this potential for the three pillars of the project, which are climate change, adaptation and mitigation, biodiversity, and farm socioeconomic resilience. Click, please. But of course, we have some challenges with this process. We have this challenge of the diversity of context and production systems that are assessed, also diversity of agroecological practices that are being implemented on the farms. I could see from the Mentimeter that this is a challenge for all of you when you're doing this kind of evaluation, this diversity, this comparison of different contexts and things that, as we already said, are difficult to compare. So this is a big challenge. We also have some of our indicators which have been adapted to specific contexts, to specific production systems to make them more relevant for local knowledge and local systems. But of course, maybe this is challenging for the transversal analysis. Sometimes also we have approaches that are a little bit different among the innovation hubs for the data collection process. Sometimes we had a control and an intervention plot, for example, in the farms in most cases, but sometimes we also explored a gradient of implementation of the practice. And of course, we had to make some choices regarding how we benchmark the indicators, and we are of course limited by the size of the data set that we have. But I also think that some of these challenges can be strengths for this transversal analysis if we handle them properly. I think it's nice to have this diversity. It's quite rich. It's also nice to have indicators that are relevant in specific context, although it might be challenging to address that in the transversal analysis. Click, please. Thank you. So even though it's still a work in progress, I think it's still useful to already show you some preliminary results based on the current data that we have. So this will be more kind of exploratory results, not final ones. The final results will come later this summer, I hope. Yeah, so let's start. Maybe the first thing is that the StreamT tool is a multi-criteria assessment tool. So we think it's interesting to gather the data, the results at the criteria level. So what we did is we have the 9 criteria, and for each criteria, we have a set of indicators that have been measured. And so we normalized all the indicators so that a value of 0 highlights the kind of worst case scenario, and a value of 1 highlights like the best case scenario. And then we chose the option to calculate the mean of all the indicators related to a criteria to have a score for each criteria with the same logic. And so we can provide the innovation hubs and the farms with a kind of spider web that you can see on the right with the results for each criteria. You can click, please. And this is another way to show the results. So you have each box, each color representing a criteria that is being assessed. On the left, each bar is an innovation hub, and on the right, each bar is a production system. And I think it's a good way to enter into the results because we can already see some trends across innovation hubs or across production systems. Click. For example, for the plant agrobiodiversity criteria, we can see that in Guadeloupe and Switzerland, we have better scores for now. I think this is mostly due to the fact that we consider in this criteria the diversity of land uses, the presence of animals, and so this is something that we can find in Switzerland and mostly in Guadeloupe. Click. We also have some homogeneity across the production systems. Here, for example, when we take a look at the criteria of climate mitigation and climate adaptation, it's quite homogeneous. And click. A last example, we can see from the horticultural system that we kind of perform better when we look at job satisfaction and job creation. I still need to go into the details of the result, but I think this is due to the fact that horticultural systems require a lot of human labor, I would say. So it kind of creates job opportunities. yeah, so we can move on to another kind of result. So the StreamT tool also includes a qualitative assessment of the agroecological practices. So we basically ask the farmers to tell us whether they think that implementing agroecological practices is effective for some parameters that we have measured. So let's say, for example, on the top line, you have the level of satisfaction with agroecological labor. And we can see from the results that most farmers consider that implementing an agroecological practice, how to say that, is kind of leading to less satisfaction or a similar satisfaction in comparison to implementing a more conventional approach. But we have to know that this level of satisfaction is based on the knowledge and labor requirements in terms of time, which is, from the data that we have, higher when you have to implement an agroecological practice. But this satisfaction also entails the pride of the farmers to do that kind of practices. And from the data, we could see that a lot of farmers are very proud and very generally satisfied, I would say, about implementing such practices. The two last rows of the graph, show the results about the stabilization of yields, increase of revenues, and we can see that most farmers consider that implementing agroecological practices does help to increase yield, revenues, lower input costs, or stabilize yields, or in worst cases, it doesn't change anything in comparison to conventional approaches. So, as I said earlier, these are preliminary, temporary results, but I think it's quite interesting to see that our tool also helps to have a more qualitative assessment that also reflects what the farmers think and how they perceive the implementation of agroecological practices. And the last result that I wanted to show you is this one. So we have collected data on the field. As I said, in most farms, we have a control and an intervention plot where the agroecological practice is implemented. And we collected data, for example, on earthworms to calculate an index of diversity of ecological groups of earthworms. So this is what this graph is about. We used two different methods for the data collection. We used mustard extraction and spade extraction. And this graph is a forest plot that is commonly used in meta-analysis approaches. And we considered each innovation hub as a separate study. And you can see on this graph the size and direction of the effect of implementing an agroecological practice on the diversity of earthworms in each innovation hub. And so very quickly, for a quick interpretation, if the confidence interval crosses the line, well, it means that there is no significant positive or negative effects of implementing such practices. But without focusing on this particular result, again, I just wanted to show you that this is the kind of thing that we can expect from this transversal analysis. And of course, we have to use this approach on other indicators that we have measured with the StreamT tool. And maybe before moving on, so these are just some results, but we would like to explore other methodologies such as correlation analysis or multivariate analysis, or using mixed models or multi-level models to better explore the results that we have at end. I really hope that we will have great results to show you in the coming months. So next slide, please. To conclude, this is where we are today, but we have plans for the coming months. So we have two planned publications. There is a first publication about the co-design process that has been led by Cecilia, and a second plan of a paper that will focus on the transversal analysis once we will have the results. We also have one project deliverable that is planned and a toolkit that should be available on Agroecology TRANSECT's website. Click, please. And so the first paper is currently under review. the second paper, we hope we will be able to submit it before the end of winter 2026. The deliverable, we have to submit it in summer, so I guess it will be publicly available in autumn, more or less. And for the toolkit, it's also planned this summer, so quite soon you will have news from us about that. Next slide, please. This is the real final conclusion. So the real final conclusion is that, of course, as it's still in process and we still have things to share with you, you can go to the next slides, please, Adrien. We can keep in touch. So really do not hesitate to take notes of our email addresses or go check the webinar recording after this webinar if you want to contact us. You can contact Adrien about more general questions, Cecilia about the development of the framework and the tool, and you can contact me about the results from the implementation and the transversal analysis that is to come. Really don't hesitate. I think it's a good opportunity to build community, to start to continue discussing this tool and the results that will come out of it. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think that was based on all the comments and all the questions. This is clearly something that's really interesting and really exciting for everyone. So there are a million questions. But before we go into that, I think that after all this presentation and everything, it would be really nice to get a few comments from you, again, using Menti, which again, you can find the link on the chat. And I'm just going to share it in a second for you to answer just 2 questions about, first, would you use it? Have you heard about the tool and would you use it? And then another one around what you think. Give me 1 second to find the right link, which is always a nightmare on these things. So if you're already there, you can see it's, I'm just struggling to share, but the Menti is already up and running, and I see that some people are already answering about whether they would use the tool or not. And yes, 2 people are happy to use the tool. No one has said no so far, but feel free to answer, and feel free to answer as honestly as you want. It doesn't have to be a resounding yes. Some people might have answered this one, but I realized that you would have answered it without hearing all the facts. So it's been cleared. So even if you answered it before, come back, answer it again. You'll be happy to know all the developers. We're at 7 people that would definitely use it. 8, come on, people. But yes, people would consider testing the tool. We will leave this up for you to answer as well. But so far, everybody who has answered are actually interested in it. So that's good news. But also, it would be interesting for us to know what improvements you think that could be made that would be relevant for you. Again, this is a slide that we're going to keep up for until at least the end of the event. So feel free to answer it, explore it, and we will revise it at the end. I think that we're ready for some questions. So speakers, are you ready to go? It's for all of you. So, if you can sort of like, I think that the best question to start with is a question that coalesces a few of the things that we've seen asked in the chat, and is a question around why would people use this tool. There was a question about the difference with other tools, especially Stream. And so why would people prefer this one over other ones? Or what does it bring that's new to the table? Why having developed the tool at all? I know it's a huge one to start, so feel free to take a little bit of time to think. But I will let anybody who feels brave enough to raise their hands and go for it.
I can start.
Cecilia, well done.
Feel free to pitch in as I go. But yeah, I think what we tried to do with this tool was really to construct it in a bottom-up manner, and so to really base it on the the experiences and the needs of these 11 innovation hubs, which really, I think, present quite a broad diversity of European farming systems. And so I think if there's an interest in monitoring agroecology in these contexts, I think there's a lot to learn from this tool in terms of the indicators, both the core ones, but also importantly, the optionals that are brought forward that are likely to be relevant. And yeah, in terms of, I think there were some questions on why this tool and not tape. And I guess they can be complementary in some way. But yeah, our starting point was really to start from the experiences of these different innovation hubs, which have a really European focus and which also tried to address some problematics that we didn't find necessarily reflected in tape. For example, looking at this climate mitigation dimension, and which also put this high emphasis on feasibility and having these reproducible indicators. And so, for example, it also stirred us a bit away from using the OASIS tool, which is very extensive and comprehensive. So we tried to navigate these middle grounds within our project, which resulted in this tool. But I think we're also moving in the direction in this field of, not necessarily just applying these tools as they are, but for each project to also try to refine them to their specific context. And so we hope that by also providing some details on how we came to this tool, so the process itself, this is also something that can be of value. So I guess future projects can borrow some elements of these tools, some elements of tape, and also proceed in this way. That's a bit of an answer, but I don't know if others have something they would like to add on this.
Jeroen has something to add.
Yeah, maybe. Well, actually, I think the explanation of Cecilia was already quite comprehensive. But just to indeed stress that last point, that it's also a framework of how you can work with these, and also the assumption that you would have one fixed tool that could address all systems across the globe. Yeah, we think it's not necessarily the best approach, and we think a flexible approach and development within a project is important. There was also another question about how to apply it, or can it be applied in tropical systems, for instance. But we do think that it is quite generic in a way, but and in combination with that process of the framework, we would think that it's quite widely applicable, but it will require some work in the sense of you have to, on the one hand, select maybe some of the indicators and maybe add also some of your own indicators. So the challenge of comparability will be there.
I love that answer, because I think that this is something that I refer to for other tools, but tools are tools. They're supposed to be helpful to you. So that's something really important to keep in mind. I think there was sort of like following on this and a little bit keeping on the same topic. There was a question around whether you think the tool will still be useful if it was slimmed down to core indicators, or if there's a shorter list of like key core indicators yet that you think, right, this need to go 100% for it to be valuable, or how would you approach that sort of like pick and choose, almost cherry picking within the tool approach? Marie-Hélène.
Yes, maybe I can try to answer that. I think one of the goals of the tool was also to be flexible. I think the goal is not to force people into using the 50 core indicators, and actually, why not take what you think is interesting, depending on what makes sense in your context and what criteria you would like to assess. Maybe it's also good to emphasize that let's say we have this set of core indicators, but sometimes it was more difficult than expected for the innovation hubs to collect some kind of data because the farmers didn't want to give some information, financial information, for example, which is understandable. So even when we use the tool ourselves in this context, sometimes we do not have all the indicators for all the farms and all the innovation hubs. So I will definitely say that yes, and also why not pick the indicators that are interesting among the list of optional indicators if you think that makes more sense. This is my opinion, of course.
Anything else you guys want to add? Jeroen.
Yeah, maybe one aspect is also the principles of agroecology that are behind it, basically, and And of course, I completely agree with Marielle. Like we have to be flexible, and it has to be applicable and relevant, etc. for your particular project. But at the same time, keep an eye on those principles. They are there for a reason, and so you do want to have a sort of holistic analysis of those. And of course, it was also already stressed from the start that creates that tension, if you will, between completeness and feasibility.
Perfect. Again, kind of going with this topic of the flexibility of the tool and how you can consider it in different environments. There's a question about if you think what would the perceived applications of this tool be in urban context. In this particular case, around microfarms and community agriculture, and whether protected horticultural settings could be a candidate despite the differences to open field agriculture. For example, if they're still embracing agroecological or organic principles within that operation. Cecilia.
Yeah, maybe just the first response is that, indeed, I don't think we had any innovation hubs that really represented this urban context, but we did have some innovation hubs that represented micro farms, and so that really put this focus also on developing indicators, looking how to integrate and also how to diversify fields. And so I think there are some indicators there, I think probably more in the optional domain, which could be of relevance. But maybe echoing what we already said, this was what came out of the experience within our project, but inevitably, I think adaptations would have to be made in different contexts, and we hope to, by giving some guidelines on how we came to this conclusion, we could show some methods to kind of co-define additional indicators and to tailor further.
Yeah, and this is probably me going on a tangent, but I think that the importance of the methodological document that you have around how you got to this, how to co-create and how to build trust are really critical issues when deciding what are you going to choose, how are you going to work. And then if anything needs fine-tuning, the way to do it, you've already explored it, and that's sort of like very relevant in terms of making sure we're not repeating mistakes. Adrien.
Yeah, just maybe to highlight what also Cecilia mentioned, I think it's that's the idea also to try to have an adaptative tool, and so that certain in urban area for urban farming, maybe some of the in the indicators you will try to have a different minimum or maximum depending on the context and the limit of your context that you have, which is also the case between the different system of the innovation hub, because as we mentioned, those are very diverse. So that's maybe the aspect of adaptation. And I would say that as you just mentioned, another the idea of a tool is to be useful. And I think that's also what you want to do with it, which is important. And so having a monitoring is always part of something. And so regarding of what you want to do with it, I think it can be certainly useful to use it, especially as it's also embedded in the principles of agroecology, which try really to be also something replicable in all the contexts that we can farm. So I think
a really good point. I think that's sort of like trying to look on the other side of the coin of this flexibility that we've discussed. There's a question around it being whether StreamT is a scientifically approved tool for academia that couldn't be incorporated in collection design. And how do you feel that would work in a different context, for example, in Africa in this case, which kind of sort of like highlights how you can be flexible and still very strong methodological at the same time, I guess. Who wants to take on that one? I see a lot of blank faces.
Yeah, I can start if you want. Certainly, the idea is that to be. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm a researcher, so certainly we developed tools that are meant to be scientifically embedded and relevant. So certainly that's the idea. But Of course, when you use indicators and when you put a monitoring is never neutral, you know. So every tool, every indicators that we will choose will have an impact on the results that you have. So I think that's something very important to have in mind. So of course, this one is one of the real specificities, trying to have this co-creation process with, as we highlight the idea that the process is maybe as important as the tool that we have. So yeah, that's I think of course it's scientifically rooted, but we have to keep in mind that none of the tool is perfect, and so those results are always related to what is the tool.
And also, just to sort of like bring something else to that aspect, it's the tool is a tool, but it will be shaped as well by the people using it and how you use it. So you can just really separate that. But Marie-Hélène.
Yes, maybe to answer the second part of the question about the reuse in the African context. From my own experience in Africa, I think it doesn't fit. In that it has been designed for the specific European context. A lot of indicators would need to be refined, even the questionnaires, the way you collect the data, I think it's so different. So maybe the best thing that you can take out of our work, if you want to use it in the African context, is take a look at the existing indicators to see what would fit your specific context. And of course, the co-development and co-innovation process, maybe also to build your own approach in the context, I think.
That's a really good point. Adrien.
Sorry. Yes, and as we are not a tool seller, so our aim is not to make money on the tool. We can also talk of the other tool as we did. So really try to compare it with the other ones, because our idea is also to bring to this whole scientific knowledge of the monitoring process. And I think in that case, TAPE is also an interesting tool, as it was already used in several African contexts. It has also been used in other contexts, but certainly in different African contexts. But because even in Africa, you have a lot of different contexts. So yeah, looking at that can be also interesting.
I think as Françoise was a little bit sad about it, but I think if anything else, it opens up possibilities and it creates that. I think that one of the important things about using a tool is a point that Julie mentioned, which is building trust with people before they need to implement it. And I think that co-creation process, while time consuming, it's like the best way that you're ever going to have to build trust, and therefore afterwards get the results that you need. So I would see it as an opportunity, but maybe I'm being overly positive. Jeroen, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the sort of discrepancies that you would see are, my hypothesis would be larger in the socio-institutional domain compared to the biophysical domain. I think there transferability to other regions is easier. But I think in particular in the social institutional domain, yeah, there may be some specific organizations, relations, arrangements, etc., and dynamics that may require you to rethink a lot of the indicators. But I would say go sort of category by category and see what fits and what does not. And indeed, also that last point that was made, I think, by both Adrien and Anna is compare tools, compare frameworks. There are also a couple of frameworks that are really specific, more for, let's say, the global south, like the HOPA, the TAPE also to some extent, and there are more like that. So do that comparison, I would say.
Super, thank you. Here's a question that again goes back to the more technical side of the tool, and it's a question around whether the tool is able to continuously monitor certain variables, or for the moment it mainly relies on discrete data collection, like interviews and surveys or things like that. Who wants to take on that one? Silence.
Yeah, maybe I can start. Yeah, so indeed, because the Innovation Hub contexts were so different, some Innovation Hubs were implementing temporal comparisons, and so we were able to monitor monitor these indicators over time, but this was not consistently the case across Innovation Hubs. So in other Innovation Hubs, maybe also the one that the work that Julie presented in Switzerland, they actually looked at farms that were implementing practices on a gradient of intensity, and so you could kind of use the space for time approach. Yeah, the tool was flexible and was not specifically designed to capture, or at least we didn't specifically implement it over multiple timescales in the project, but of course it could be used that way.
Yeah, and also we did not implement the tool as a sort of digital twin or so, that monitors sort of in real time what's going on. But yeah, it could be a sort of point of departure for thinking about that. But then again, a sort of feasibility question will come up for specific indicators. Can you monitor or live monitor dynamics within the particular socio-institutional domain? Yeah, it's a nice sort of avenue for further research, I think, also.
A really good point. Now I'm going to ask a technical question, so I'm just going to read it. But there's a question of whether the tool assesses agroecology's gender dynamics, or is that something that would need to be added, maybe using the co-creation methodology that's already implied in the process.
Could you repeat? I missed a few words in that sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether this is actually assessing sort of like gender dynamics within the model, or is it just something that's a little bit beyond what this model in particular is exploring? Marie-Hélène?
Yes, thank you. We do have one indicator about gender, but only one. And it's kind of a composite indicator, so it accounts for whether the farm is owned by a woman or not, whether they are women working on the farm or not, if they tend to do free work or paid work, and also if there is a difference in the types of tasks that are done by men or women. And we are also specifically asking for men workers, women workers, and non-binary workers also. So this is it for gender, actually.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I'm just reading the comments, and there's a comment from Marta that I think is really relevant, which is highlighting that if you're building trust, that means that at least you and the people that you're working with should have similar or aligned objectives. And that goes beyond the technical dimensions. So just to consider that every time that we're talking about agroecology, every time that we're working with this, we're not only focusing on super technical, practical aspects, we're thinking more holistically regarding our humanity as well. So just to consider that side as well. A final question that I think aligns very good with a previous question that we had that I've not answered yet. I guess that the question is, who do you think would benefit the most, or who can benefit from using this tool? Is it mostly for practitioners? Is it for farmers? Is it for researchers? Is it for policymakers? And associated with that, what is the level of technical knowledge or the technical skill that is required to monitor certain of these aspects? For example, in this case, and it's a very good example, do farmers who have never measured soil health, can they apply the tool and explore it? Marie-Hélène.
Thanks again. Okay, sorry. So I already forgot the first part of the question. Yes.
Who is it for?
So the primary.
That's a very long-winded way to ask who is it for.
The primary users of the tool, I think for now, it's researchers who are working on the specific topic and in co-innovation, co-design approaches. Maybe also because for now, for the calculation of the indicators, it requires some time, some skills to be able to analyze, calculate, and gather the data, and so on. But for the field measurements themselves, the core indicators, I think it's really accessible even to farmers who are not used to do that. Cecilia and the Innovation Hubs prepared great protocols for the field measurements. So, for example, for the earthworms, you don't need you just need to understand the protocol, I would say. So it is something that anyone can handle if you have the appropriate material. And for the soil analysis that are required, you just need, as a farmer, to collect the soil samples following the protocol, and then you, of course, have to send it to a laboratory. So I think it's accessible, and we hope that with the additional material that you would like to develop to make the tool reusable, it will be easier for people who are not researchers and do not have skills in data analysis to use the tool and calculate the indicators and have some results. Let's see how it goes. And maybe one last thing is that in some innovation hubs, they have optional indicators that they use that also do not require very specific technical skills because they are based on observation, for example. So this is also a possibility to include that kind of indicators in your assessment if you want to or if you need to. Yeah.
Fantastic. And look at us at 10:28 UK time, 11:28 European time, so almost perfectly on time, having answered all the questions, including Nina's last question, which Cecilia just very nicely answered there in the chat, which is around how people can find the indicators, explore the core and the optional ones. It will all be in our website, which will be accessible to everyone as soon as it's ready to go. We will share both this presentation recording and key links in a follow-up email, so don't worry. And please feel free as well to reach out to any of us at any point. I think that one thing that I've learned working with this amazing team is that they really like talking about these things and they really are making a difference on the world. So reach out to them, please don't be shy, or reach out to me and I'll connect you accordingly. So with that, thank you everyone for having joined us, for all your questions. I think it's really been helpful for us for answering the Menti. I see some answers there that will help us customize the results. And I'm grateful to our amazing, amazing speakers. I'm going to go in order of who is in my screen: Adrien, Cecilia, Jero, and Marie-Hélène, and Julie. Thank you so much. And see you soon. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.